for first of all having the idea of this Future Law Association, which I must say I welcome very strongly. I think it's really important that we get together and talk about these things. And I'm only sorry that we weren't able to come down to Dublin to see you all in person. We're doing our sort of postgraduate review week, and we said to the organizer, please leave Tuesday free for us. So of course, Tuesday was not left free, and we've been popping in and out and doing reviews of our postgrad progress, which meant we aren't with you. But we did want to try and tell you a little bit about some of our research. Now, Ronan did say, I think in one of the early invitations, that he would be open to kind of things that weren't fully thought through, or perhaps things that were at a very early stage. And I'm afraid to say we've taken that very seriously compared to all the other presentations, which have been pellucid examples of wonderful ideas and things put together in an elegant way. Ours really is very much very early stages. I mean, Brian talked about his being at an early stage. We're at a much earlier stage. We're just beginning to fiddle around with looking at how legal technology has affected the legal profession in Northern Ireland. And some of this came out of a discussion I think we had with Ronan, perhaps John Danaher, where I don't know if we picked this up wrongly, but we got the impression there was a feeling in the Republic of Ireland that the north of Ireland was ahead, and we thought surely not, and we thought we'd better have a look and find out what was going on. And we were also struck by this idea we had of the lawyer on the beach, the idea that the technology was such that perhaps lawyers no longer needed to flock together in the same way. You could run a practice from your laptop sitting in the west of Ireland or whatever, and have a so just kind of we just love that image. We'd heard about businesses being run from mobile phones. We wondered, has law changed? So essentially we thought we'd do a bit of naked empiricism and just go out and ask. And again, like Brian and colleagues, we are supported by the Law Society in Northern Ireland. Ciarán's on their tech committee, and they gave us some insights and some contacts so we could begin our exercise in really just asking people what they were doing. So essentially what we're going to talk about is just what we found so far, and then we'll look at how law tech is used. Law tech is both an affordance and as an apparatus. And then Ciarán's going to do the clever stuff later on. We're going to talk a little bit about the legal laboratory and the lawyer as a prompt engineer, and how that affects the nature of legal knowledge and what that might mean in wider terms. So to start off with, then, I think we basically asked a number of lawyers, innovators, what they were doing, and how this, really wanting to know whether this was changing the nature of legal practice. Now, I did a study maybe 20 years ago about how the legal profession was distributed in Northern Ireland, and then it was largely sole practitioners with a few large law firms based in the bigger towns and the cities who were doing basic domestic work, a little bit of business stuff again in the big cities, and a lot of kind of conflict related criminal material. And that's changed quite a lot in Northern Ireland. Now there are still lots of sole practitioners, but there is a much greater gathering together of lawyers in larger groups in the cities, and there is this new phenomenon of the big corporate lawyers who will have offices in Northern Ireland, the so-called follow the sun giants. So we wanted to look really at all of these, but so far what we've really been looking at is the innovators, various solicitors in Northern Ireland. So our focus is slightly different from that of England and Wales, and slightly different from the Republic of Ireland. We're trying to see what the effect this might be on legal practice, how it might change that, and then look in particular at what it is exactly that the different aspects, the different layers, the different people who are involved in legal practice are doing. So really interesting to see the effect on this is something we've really got a sense of on the small firms. Really interesting to see that there's a lot of concern, certainly in law society terms, that many of these firms will simply not be able to cope with what is happening in terms of legal tech development. In particular, there's concerns about cybersecurity concerns. We heard various tales of solo practitioners who were using Gmail accounts and so forth to do their quite high level financial transactions and so forth, and there was a problem about getting liability insurance. So there's a phenomenon whereby people who maybe have a legal practice, a sole legal practice, think this is something, you know, that will provide their pension pot or whatever, or something they can pass on to their son and daughter. And the Law Society being a bit, or some people in the Law Society perhaps being a bit concerned that maybe this kind of asset is a very limited value. So that was something we were looking at, and then trying to see whether or not big law firms would develop tech and essentially eat the breakfast of all these smaller practitioners. Thinking about what it is that lawyers did, we found there was a whole series of innovators. We talked, for example, to someone in a suburban part of Belfast who had developed their own kind of conveyancing portal, really quite sophisticated in some ways, and it was really done in their spare time, essentially, to try and develop some understanding of how they could put online all aspects of conveyancing, right through from the estate agent, the client, the other side, and so forth. And really quite an interesting. I'm trying to get my picture on the screen here. I don't know why I disappeared. Am I back? No. I just realised that you're looking at a book, a series of books, you know, rather than me. So I'll try and turn that off. I'll try and materialise for you if I can. We also looked at a personal injury law firm in a largish town who had quite a sophisticated system which they had developed themselves. They had bought one off the shelf, as it were. I hope I'm going to materialise now. No, they bought one off the shelf, and they had tweaked it in order to be able to make really quite sophisticated predictions about certain outcomes, right down to the quantum of damages they might expect from particular courts and so forth. And this was something which they were pioneering themselves and using in a really quite sophisticated way. And again, we were sort of similar to the other study. We're kind of asking them what's going on here. And in large part, it wasn't about finding a tech solution. It was about trying to smooth over the process of law so they could become better placed to advise their clients, to become the sort of business advisor, working on the kind of client care aspect. So there's not saying that they weren't interested in the law side of it, but I think the suggestion we're getting at this very early stage is that the law aspect is kind of changing its nature. It's less kind of, not that the practice of law was ever particularly legally technical, but much more based on a kind of opening up opportunities to do this wider legal job. I'll hand over to Ciarán now to do the clever stuff.
Thanks very much, John. I hope you can hear me, and I hope you can see me. I'm not manifesting as a bookshelf, I hope. So just moving on very, very quickly. Yeah, one of the things that we found very often in the large firms in Belfast, anecdotally, but also starting to sneak in the kind of mid-sized firms, is really a kind of a transformation towards not just using law tech as a tool towards the clients, for instance, certainly that, but also that it becomes an apparatus, by which we mean, so there's a picture of a kind of clustering algorithm, you know, when firms using kind of probability-based statistical algorithms, they think that talked about earlier, you know, to 95% certainty around what's in a data set, etc., using keyword searches. That this is starting to sneak in legal practice, and we would say this is more than just the stuff being a tool. I think the solicitors you talk to a lot of the time will see it as transformational. They want to transform property transactions, etc. But we see something more profound than simply it being a tool taking place, and that is that more self-consciously and more pervasively legal practice and individual legal practices in the large firms, certainly also in the medium-sized firms, are becoming kind of entangled with industrial formations, as Crawford calls AI, of practice, and are having to really think very hard about the epistemic cultures in the firms. by which we mean, so this is on to kind of prompt engineering, which I know people who are know about more about this stuff than certainly I do. We're talking about this morning that not that lawyers are more likely to end up, and practices are more likely, if they survive, to end up involving multidisciplinary teams that manage the apparatus. The way I kind of think of it is when you look at science labs, the stuff that physicists want to consider, want to work on, can't be seen with the naked eye. No longer is an apple falling from a tree and you can say, look over there, there's an apple. I know I'm separate from that object and all of that. What happens is that laboratories become far more entangled with the scientist, and what comes out isn't a property of the object, it's a property of the whole apparatus. It's a property of the machine, the object, and the scientist, all entangled together. And as Ciarán Norsatina says about scientists, scientists need to be considered as methods of inquiry themselves. So the individual is a method of inquiry. She says in the laboratory, scientists are methods of inquiry. They are part of a field's research strategy and a technical device in the production of knowledge. And we'd say, we hope, as we build into the project, that that's the same for lawyers. Lawyers are part of the field's research strategy and a technical device, the production of knowledge. And when you come to things, the use of AI, when you come to disclosure, for instance, then these multidisciplinary teams and the lawyer leads on these teams are talking more and more about method, how they have to disclose method, how they have to be very self-conscious about statistical methods that they employ when they bring evidence back to courts, for instance. But one of the things that we'd also say is that emerges isn't just this kind of rise in technical skills, but if you look at prompt engineering as well, it's all about humanities skills. It's all about that critical reasoning, understanding texts, communicating those texts, communicating to the computer, and then back outwards to the court, for instance. So just thinking very, very quickly about that. One of our interviewees talked very much about using AI, but the thing that they were very interested in was, how we need people to be making the right decisions. They're very interested in the human component, how legal professionals, etc., we're using, we're interacting with the tech and thinking about how they need to be making the right decisions. And another group that I was talking with at one stage, less formally, I should say, talked about legal drafting, for instance, that the junior lawyer needs to know not just about drafting to the court, but also drafting to the algorithm. Even if they're handwriting on a contract, a change in the terms of the contract, they need to handwrite such that a computer can scan it and then incorporate it into the process. So, we shouldn't talk about humans in the loop. Humans are the loop. We're part of the loop here with technology. So very quickly, a conclusion, because I know we're trying to keep to time. A few things to say, and things that we try and realize, I suppose, in some of the education stuff we're doing, for instance, on Linus, where you'd be supervised by somebody in a law school, but also then supervised by somebody from a cybersecurity unit, or computer science or physics, etc., and vice versa, and through our LLM. We want to instill this kind of sense that the profession is changing unevenly, and the implications of it, we have to be very careful with this, are uneven. Small firms are facing different challenges, as John said, even for cybersecurity insurance, than the larger firms that have that follow the sun model, where the process follows the working day around the earth. Well, we should take an interest in those ad hoc idiosyncratic experiments and think about the broader picture of the firm ending up in some ways more like a lab, and thinking about how we can educate towards it and create research programs for PhD researchers that speak into that. John, did you want to jump in at all?
Well, not only to say that we do think this is a kind of a different knowledge paradigm involved here, that rather like we're not going to teach lawyers to be prompt engineers only, but we are knowledge is different. There's not a sense in which the law degree will be about learning stuff that you're going to use, if indeed it ever was like that. The law degree will be more like a sort of socializing process, which will enable people to know the nature and limits of the legal process, so they don't do crazy arguments that a computer engineer might make. They know that certain legal arguments are reasonable arguments. Certain business arguments are reasonable arguments, not that anything's possible or whatever. So it's again about teaching people to refine the prompt. So it's a different world. I think we have to prepare our lawyers for, as many people have been saying in the course of the day. And I think we're very much behind that.